My name is Kristen Wren, and I have the honor and privilege this year of being the annual meeting program chair. And when we decided on our theme for this year's meeting, Bill Tierney and I talked about how to do more than hang around in hotel ballrooms talking to ourselves about poverty and education. We wondered how might we live more fully into our intellectual and personal commitments to interrupting conditions of impoverishment. We wondered how might we do that in the context of an annual meeting. Bill sought a community partner who could help us connect theory to practice, and with the help of Victor Garcia and Ron Hallett, determined that Glide Memorial Church could be an ideal partner for AERA. If you've had a chance to explore Glide's programs, services, facilities, and outreach, you know what a marvelous organization they've been, and you'll hear more this afternoon about the journey that our speakers, the founders, and leaders of Glide have taken. Before I introduce our session moderator, I want to say thank you on behalf of Bill and myself to the founders and to all of the Glide staff who've embraced AERA as their temporary neighbors. AERA members have toured facilities, attended celebration services, served in the kitchen preparing meals, and contributed to a fund to purchase new computers for a youth learning laboratory. I'll leave that there for another few minutes. Get that little bit.ly thing. That's how you can make your own donation. As of this morning, we're up around $8,100. We are getting close, but we could use that one extra latte you're not going to buy today. We could use that. And Division G actually contributed a $5,000 donation, which is remarkable and very consistent with their mission. So if you are moved during the presentation to make a contribution, there's the link, or you can locate it right off the AERA homepage under the Annual Meeting Opportunities for Social Justice link. With no further ado, I welcome to the podium AERA's nearly president-elect, I guess she's elect-elect, Dr. Joyce King, who will introduce Glide's founders. Thank you, Joyce, for your service to the Annual Meeting Program Committee and the service you've entered into as president-elect.
Great pleasure of presenting to you our esteemed speakers from Glide, and I'm not going to take a lot of time with formal introductions. I want to say that we have here history, living history, more than 40 years at an institution that belongs to the community here. Distinguished by their credentials of service and activism, Reverend Cecil Williams, who has been a pastor and founder of Glide Memorial Methodist Church from a liberation theology perspective. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. And Janice Mirikitani, who in her own right is recognized as a visionary social activist. And in looking at her biography, I found out that she has a teaching credential, in addition to many other fantastic accomplishments, Poet Laureate of San Francisco and founding director of Glide Foundation. As a team, they have much to teach us about transformation, poverty, and education. And so with apologies for not going into more detail about their illustrious accomplishments, I think we can hear from them in person about who they are and how they've come to be where we are with them today. And I hope they'll start by telling us a little bit about their personal lives even before they got together, and then we'll hear so much more about what this powerful couple has accomplished. Please come up and join us. We would like to start by asking you to tell us about you before Glide.
Do you want to start?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to start?
You can start.
You want me to start?
Yeah.
Because if he starts, I won't get a word in edgewise, right? I was before Glide.
Before Glide.
Before Glide, my family and I were incarcerated along with 120,000 other Japanese Americans in a concentration camp, 10 concentration camps throughout the country. And I was raised in Petaluma, which is only 50 miles north of here, on a chicken farm. My childhood was one of great abuse and by several adult men in my family. And I couldn't wait to escape. So the one way that I think our parents, particularly Asian parents, tell you that you have to escape is through education. So I made sure that, like a good Japanese girl, Japanese American girl, that I got good grades and good enough grades to get a scholarship to UCLA. I graduated from UCLA, got my teaching credential from UC Berkeley, and I taught high school for 2 years before coming to Glide. I taught at a very poor school in Berkeley, and I taught at a very wealthy school in Walnut Creek. And it was that was much more educational for me in terms of learning from the students and learning from the system why I didn't want to become a teacher. And so I went back to San Francisco State University for my master's degree in creative writing. And while I was there, because I needed to pay rent and buy groceries, a friend of mine said there was a job opening, a temporary part-time job opening at Glide, and that's how I entered Glide. But if it were not for the job, I would not probably have gone 2 blocks within a church, because I was very anti-religious. And I was actually working for the foundation, which was the urban center. And, I don't know if you know much about the structure of Glide, but the urban center and the church do have a marriage. I mean, we are under the auspices of the United Methodist Church. But then I met this man who, when I first met him, sat on the corner of my desk. I was, typing away and transcribing these tapes from people from the lesbian gay community who had been harassed and brutalized by the police. And he sat on the corner of my desk and said, "Don't you know who I am?" And I said, "No." And he said, "You don't know who I am?" And I said, "No." And he walked away and didn't speak to me for 2 weeks. I thought for sure that I had lost my job. So I asked everybody, who's the guy with the ego? And they said, "Oh, you met Cecil." And that was my first day, first week at Glide.
All right, thank you. Reverend Cecil Williams, before Glide.
I often say that that when I was in my mother's womb, she said, be a minister. So I was a minister even before I was born. I knew that sooner or later, when I finally emerged, I discovered that it was important for me to be a minister and for my family to call me Reverend. Rev, they call me. It was awful to be called a reverend even before you had made the decision about being a reverend. But my mother said, "You are going to be a minister. That's that." She also said to me, "You're going to get your education. If you're going to deal with segregation and racism, you are going to have to get an education." There were 5 boys and 1 girl in my family. My family was a very interesting group of folks because we were very close. And being very close, we interacted with each other in ways that always checked out with each other about what we were doing and how we were doing it. I shall never forget one of the episodes that I went through was the fact that I was called, I think, by my community to do certain things. They I don't know, they just expected me to be something that I wasn't sure I wanted to be. Not just a minister, but just I entered a spelling contest, for instance. And I don't know how in the world I won that contest, but I did. And I was surprised that I would enter and win a spelling contest. I was often called to say something before the group, whether at school or at home or whatever. And then we also not only had words that we used, but also we used music. we were very close in regards to our familiar interaction with music. And much of our music we created or we found out about as we grew together closer and more vividly apparent in what we were doing, that it counted. Everything counted at my place, my home, my family. And having gone through that, I often felt like that they pushed me too much, but I found out that what they were pushing me to do was something that I finally engaged in. And I had engaged in some difficulty with them, some of the members of the family. So I had a breakdown. And it was not their fault, it was my fault, of course. And in that breakdown was when I came to something very important that I still hold on to now, and that's imagination. Using imagination, I have often been a part of situations that emerged in situations that were very good for me. I counted that as something that was a pivotal point in my life. And so in the book, I even talk about this breakdown that I had. The breakdown was probably the most important experience that I've had in my life. But it did something for me that I've never been able to give up, and that is using my imagination and making things count. That's sort of the first part of my interaction in life.
Thank you. So we now have you here at Glide, having made a huge footprint in the church, in the ministry, in the community, with a blend of communities and cultures. When you think of the legacy that you will have left, how would you describe your legacy?
In one sentence or less?
As many as you like.
Well, let me just say that I would hope that Glide is a model for how we can bring differences together. So I would hope that Glide is a model for diversity. I would hope that if there is a legacy of Glide, that is that of what Cecil says are his basic tenets, which are unconditional love and unconditional acceptance. But I think that those are just words for people unless you experience what it means to go to the edge. And that's what attracted me to stay at Glide. I mean, not only was I attracted to Cecil, not as, a guy or, someone I wanted to get with, but rather, although...
Not too bad, huh?
I mean, I had a lot of competition, though, you know what I mean? Actually, he was married, and he married me and my first husband, which is kind of a funny story, but...
It was the worst wedding I had ever performed in my life. Awful wedding.
But what attracted me was that Cecil was also very anti-traditional religion, and he was committed to turning the church upside down, and he very, very forcefully and very aggressively, in his first day of appointment, did so by throwing open the doors and going out into the streets. And as you know, the Tenderloin, if you've experienced, it's right across the street from you, or you're in it. As you can see, it's a very, very poor community. And at that time, there were a lot of pornographic shops. There was a lot more open prostitution. There was a lot more drug dealing. And there was a confluence of the gay, lesbian, transgender, bisexual community. And I will tell you that they provided for me the edge, what I call the margin, the edge. The young people that I work with who were gay, who were runaways or who were kicked out of their homes because they were gay, and who were in all forms of dress and drag, and who also sold drugs in their bodies for money. But they were my mirrors. They were my messengers, just like my students who were from broken homes and who were from the poor communities were my messengers. And they taught me that it is the margins where we find ourselves more uniquely and more authentically than when you try to bring everything to the traditional center. So if there is a legacy, I would hope that it is a legacy of going out to the margins and bringing people into the center to be recognized for their voice, for their authentic voice. Not to come to the center to be traditional, but rather to be recognized, to be seen, to be visible to one another, regardless of our differences. So if there is a legacy that I hopefully am a part of, and that I am a part of with Cecil in partnership, it is of diversity, it is of acceptance of all of our differences. It really truly is the respect of every single human life as having value, and that transformation and hope is possible everywhere and anywhere if you are open to the different ways in which that can happen.
My legacy would be, hopefully, that I have touched humanity, that I've touched the world one way or the other, that Jan and I, when we do things together, and we often do, really do, we touch people not only from one class to another class, but we also touch people when it comes to love, when it comes to taking time to really see people from where they come from and what they do and how they do it, and to say to them, we accept you as you are. My legacy, I would hope, would be in acceptance and love, unconditional love. It's to touch people in the world. Just it doesn't have to be a long touch, just a touch, it seems to me, touching the people of the world, making sure that humanity understands that there are those of us who won't give up on them, and hopefully will never give up at all.
Well, I think you already are a model, and we're honored to have you here sharing your lessons of life and love with this association. As researchers, professors, we're also parents, couples, singles, brothers, sisters. We are living our lives as you have lived yours. Could you share with us a lesson learned in terms of overcoming an obstacle?
There's so many obstacles. There were a lot of obstacles, but in many ways they were the gifts. And it's funny that I think Glide started. I say that Cecil's career at Glide started with sex, because he got so involved with immediately got involved with same-sex marriage, that we were dealing with the LGBTQ community, that we were dealing with many, many issues around gender and sexual orientation, and a lot of the hatred that was, part of the church's, particularly the church's rejection of people's differences in sexual orientation. And so I think that I can't remember your question, but that's because
it's an obstacle that you overcame. But I want you to just contextualize that a bit, because some of us may not know how long ago that was.
That was
you're talking
45
about.
years ago, and that was before all of this hoo-ha came. I mean, can you believe the hoo-ha that's coming out about this guy? What's his name, Conroy?
Yeah.
Who, the basketball player who came out? I can't believe it. I mean, what is so odd and so newsworthy about a person who is an athlete being gay? I mean, we have gay business people, we have gay, gay choir members, gay choir directors, gay people in every walk of life, and people have come out before about being gay in the female sports arena, and I'm just amazed at that it is still such a controversial issue that it requires all of this attention. And to me, it's an everyday fact of life. I mean, we are gay, we are straight, we are whatever we are, and all of us should be respected for that. So it's an odd thing to me. It's an odd thing to me. But the obstacles, I think, are sort of obvious, that when Cecil came out and conducted the same-sex marriage, and in particular within the United Methodist denomination, where they don't even acknowledge, I mean, they're still debating the sexual orientation issue in the church conferences, that was a great controversy, but yet it was a great gift. I mean, it taught so much to me, at least, and I think to the community, even though there was much rejection and much controversy about it, of what love truly is, what love can truly do, and what acceptance can truly do. He made that obstacle into a point of justice.
Jan, I'm convinced that one reason why we're getting such large press, huge press, in regards to the basketball player, because it's money. Money for one thing, okay? They want to make sure that they continue to make that money, those who have the commitment of continuing to grow, and money plays a major part in that growth. And they don't want to upset the apple cart by any means of having a person in the field of sports, or whatever the case might be, to become an obstacle by outing, by saying, I am gay, you know?
Because they'll lose business.
They lose business.
Yeah,
They
yeah.
lose business.
And just the endorsements and things like
Yes,
that?
yes. Money plays a major part, there's no doubt about it. That's a grave obstacle.
I think other obstacles include, for me, personally, finding voice, because when I first came to Glide, I didn't have a voice, I didn't have a sense of self, I didn't have a sense of my own identity. In fact, I'd spent all that time trying to be somebody I'm not, anything but me, anyone but me, trying to be white, trying to be acceptable, trying to be loved in all the wrong places, and being involved in very self-destructive relationships. So I think one way that was a gift, or if you want to call it overcoming, was for us to get involved with recovery. And it became a very authentic recovery program, because I think what we do at Glide is we involve the people who are being affected by the problems of whether it's addiction or domestic violence or abuse or poverty or whatever their situation is, that we involve them in becoming part of the answer or part of the solution. And I think that that's what you as educators are also seeking for, right, is to find out ways to better, rather than the banking, the Paulo Freire's. I was reading him as I was riding over here. I said, I better bone up on some of this. Rather than the banking or deposit kind of education that is more traditional, that, really it's liberation. It's how you free people to find their voices, to dialogue, where you do mutually learn from one another. And of course, who knows better what the needs are than the people who are suffering the conditions? Mm-hmm. And who knows better how students, or how all of us learn, except through experience, and except through the way in which we change our feelings about who we are. So when I came to Glide, I learned through recovery how to find a voice, and found a voice because I was believed in by this man, and because I was affirmed by so many other stories that were so similar to mine.
Through also praxis. I noticed that they've got it on the board there, praxis. Taking action, making sure you take action. You don't talk, dialogue. Dialogue is quite different from not doing it, not saying it, not having it take place. But to have it take place, you've got to be able, I've got to be able to say, this is what I'm doing, and doing it. I've got to be able to keep it out there, not just say, that I will one of these days take care of it. No, we take care of it now. So the now becomes critical as far as I'm concerned. It becomes critical in what I do and what I say and how I act my life. It's always caught up, it seems to me, in something close to what it really means to act out my life right at this moment.
I want to go back to your question about legacy, because I also want to acknowledge the staff from Glide here and say that we're working and they're very committed, I think, to the values that Glide has modeled for all these decades, and they are responsible for holding all the programs that continue to grow in strength and continue to learn how we can be more effective and relevant and continue to stay on the edge with the people. And Rita Shimon and Kristen Growney Yamamoto, the co-executive directors, are here, and we have some people from our fund development staff. And could you stand, because I think I want to acknowledge you are the ones who are going to be carrying us forward. I think that the conscientiousness of this staff to work with the people from the street, to work with people who have been released from the prisons, who are working with people in the programs who are in recovery, and that commitment to continue that culture of inclusiveness is very, very important. And of course, to stay on the edge of radical and cutting edge programs. That is really, really important. And it's hard to do. It is one of the hardest things to do because it is troublesome. It's troublesome to get the voice of the masses involved in decision making because it's so much easier to be a benevolent dictator. I mean, I am often a benevolent dictator in meetings, but I do think that is very hard work. So I want to commend the leadership and all of the staff who continue that commitment.
Thank you. Reverend Williams, I want to ask you that same question, to think about an obstacle that you overcame and the lesson that you took from that we could all benefit from.
It has to do with race. The fact that I experienced in Texas years ago, the fact that we were in a segregated community. My adventure began when there were signs posted up in restaurants, in grocery stores, in clothing stores in Texas. There were signs that said colored and signs that said what was the term I'm trying to use? Not just colored, but, well, anyway.
Whites only?
Yeah, white, in some bathrooms had whites only. So I came at the time that there were signs still up indicating that I had limitations, that we had limitations because of racism, because racism was still very apparent. The fact that the way that we worked and the way that we had things take place were interesting because we didn't just couch it in hatred of whites. We began to find ways to put things together that would mimic or at least engage in some of the things that my mother, for instance, said, or my father said. They would say, don't spend all your years trying to be hating folks, because when you hate folks, you take up a lot of time and energy. And you don't need to spend all that time and energy doing that. What you need to spend your energy and time is getting your education, or making sure that you don't go against folks. They even talked about forgiveness, which was very difficult for me, to have to overcome people by forgiving people. I was not, well, anyway, I had a difficult time, and I think most of the parents and also the members of our family had a difficult time. But what I did is, after that breakdown, I began to see that there were things that could happen if, in fact, I had them to take place with a different way of approaching it. And that would be to at least reach out to folks that I was not so comfortable being with, to becoming comfortable in a way that whatever I did, I had something to offer. Now there's the key. I had something to offer. I was not just a meek, soft-spoken African-American kid. I asserted myself. I asserted and worked with other people. I could see that when we gathered, and finally we did begin to gather in different groups of people at my home as a kid, but later on when I got to SMU, by the way, that got me. I didn't know Bush was that President Bush, should I say former President Bush, that he was going to be at SMU. He's going to have a museum at SMU. Library. Well, it wasn't. It was a museum. Yeah, it was a museum. Anyway, a library at Southern Methodist University. That's my school. I was one of the first African Americans at SMU. But the critical thing is, I began to see that if I could overcome certain things, that I felt better, that I felt stronger, that I learned more, that I became something that was more important. And therefore, that got me. It moved me. It helped me. It made things happen in my life. I stood up more. I counted more. And when I got to SMU, it was the same thing. I just was somebody. I was adding something. I was caring. I was doing for people. I made sure that I had a voice. Doing that, I was utterly shaken and surprised that these were obstacles that I could overcome. And racism was one. That's not to say that I'm through. It just says that I saw it as a way of helping people and myself win the battle. We could win the battle if we work together. And if I could make a contribution rather than just always somebody else making the contribution or trying to make the contribution. It was that helped me to overcome many obstacles. And if you read that book, you will see that book has to do with the very thing that you're raising, Doctor, and that is we became and have become people that constantly have overcome obstacles. Mm-hmm. That's what that book is really about.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And I was going to, sometimes I lose a thread of thought, and I have to accept the fact that I've been in denial about my aging. But my this reminds me that I think some of the first projects we got involved with had to do with education, had to do with injustice in education, and I think that it is a disgrace that we as a country are still having to fight that battle of injustice in education, because there's so much that is going to be broken more, even more so in terms of poverty and in terms of perpetuation of poverty and marginalization of people of color and poor people because of our educational system and the ways in which we are not addressing how people have been ghettoized, colonized, even in the educational system. But I think some of the first projects we became involved in had to do with desegregation, had to do with one-way busing, segregated busing, closing down of African-American schools, and having African-American children have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to catch buses to get integrated into white schools that were, an hour away. So and one of the first protests that I participated with Cecil in was when we blocked the school buses from leaving the barn, and he got arrested for that. But that was great because it really pointed, Cecil knows how to get press and point up, issues that need to come to the public's attention. And that kind of injustice was, very prevalent even then in the 60s. So and early 70s. And we continue to battle this. We continue to see how, you know, some communities have access and others do not.
Yes.
So
What would you tell us about poverty today in 2013? You've had a long time in the fight for justice and equality and inclusion, and today we're facing the intensification, if I can put it that way, the intensification of poverty. What would you tell us about where we are today in our society with respect to poverty?
Poverty will always be with us. I say that because I believe it very strongly. I notice that there are a number of groups saying now, especially at this time, we're going to end poverty. We're going to, you know, we are a group that's going to end poverty. No, you're not a group that's going to end the poverty, because there's no doubt about it. What we have done, when we face issues, poverty becomes the first and the foremost issue that we confront at Glide. We deal with folks who are poor. That's where we are. That's where we start. That's where we go. And that's where we will continue to go. Poverty, poor people, people that have gone through many trials and tribulations. The prison system, for instance, one of the largest institutions, of course, in the country is, of course, our prison system. There's just no doubt about it. What it has done and what it does in many ways is it incarcerates people, and they're there. They're there. I remember speaking at a number of prisons, and there are people who've been there for years and years. Young folks have been there for years and years, and beginning to get older by far. So the prison system has a definite way of imposing its limitations and upon people, and it will always be there. There's no doubt about it, because money is involved in the prison system. You can believe that. Number two, not only is it the prison system, but poverty touches, of course, communities, neighborhoods, people who are on the street, people who have tried to make connections work and can't do it because of either mental illness, and that's one of the certainly critical things, as well as people who have found themselves going against whatever way that they try to pull things off and are able to get things. We call it making ends meet. People find it difficult to make ends meet. Another thing that happens, families always facing crisis. If they can't live very long in a location, many times families are moved out of where they at least had some stability to no stability at all. And so they become shattered, and they become in a position where they're not able to do much of anything except just be around and be a part of whatever is offered in that community, in that city, in that neighborhood. Finally, just let me say that there's people that because of the drug scene and because of what they have to go through in trying to medical situations, trying to make them reach certain, at least, conditions, health conditions that would help them survive, that would give them more power of being healing power, that would help them move from one level to a better level. These things are always very apparent, very strong there. And so poverty is that which drains us in regards to our total existence. It is a way of saying, you are nobody, you are no good, we're going to take away what else you have. And the first people that are hit, I was just talking to several of the politicians not too long ago, the first people that will be hit whenever anything takes place in regards to where the money is going to go and where the money is going for the programs on a national level, on a federal level, or whatever the case might be, it always goes first and foremost to the poor. Because there's just no doubt about it. They have no power. They have no power to pull things off, and when they do, it takes much longer unless they've got other ways of putting that power together in numbers and making sure that they have large numbers of people to confront issues that relate to winning the battle. It is difficult because of, I would say, in many ways, capitalism. It is difficult because the poor are over here and the rich are over here. And it's very, very difficult, I'll just say, even in this city, to know that we are not going to have a system that's set up that says the poor are going to always be here and the rich are going to always be here. San Francisco, by some of the politicians, is looked upon as the city that has poor folks and rich folks. There is no middle class. Having said that, then, it seems to me that there is no commitment to win the battle. There's no real commitment to win the battle. There's no real commitment to say, not only are we going to defeat poverty, but we're going to wipe out poverty. And you can't wipe it out. You cannot wipe it out as long as there are those who are running for office who will never in the world make sure that poor people become wholesome people and concerned people and people finally who will win the battle. Poverty will always be with us.
I think poverty is an extremely complex issue, just as education is an extremely complex issue, and I think they're related. I think all of these issues are connected. At Glide, for the past 5 decades, I think what we have attempted to do is we have a mission that is defined by, number one, alleviating suffering, because, we feed people, we provide programs and services that meet their immediate needs and alleviate their homelessness, their hunger, meet their basic needs. And we've discovered over the years that it is very important not just to see hunger as one single issue or poverty as a single issue problem. That poverty, encompasses the entire life of the individual, the family, the community. And so we discovered that we had to have recovery programs, we had to have a clinic, we had to have children's programs, we had to have support systems, we had to have case management. I think it wouldn't be bad for the schools to have case management. I'm sorry, former teacher talking. But I do think that, one way that young people can be supported, and everybody can be supported, is, to have that individual attention. How can you possibly teach anything with a class of 40 and numbers growing even larger? But okay, never mind. I think what we realize is that what we have to deal with the individual holistically, and that everybody's problems are very, very unique. And you can't just put a Band-Aid on a cancer. You have to look at every single part of their situation that needs to be addressed. So yes, case management is important, identifying their mental illnesses or their multiple problems of perhaps having AIDS, or perhaps being physically as well as mentally ill, as well as having an addiction. I think we have to look at the total individual, and that is how we have built our programs, is in a holistic manner, so that people can, and getting them out of shame. I think shame is a killer, and I think shame is what defines so many lives of people who are poor. In this country, we're taught that it is shameful to be poor. It is shameful not to have a job. It is shameful not to be a Christian. I mean, shame kills us, and it is shameful to have been molested or raped. It is shameful to be, of a different race, or gay, or lesbian. It is, I think we're a very judgmental society, and I think that our children feel that very much so. And a lot of the reasons why truancy, we discovered a lot of the reasons why truancy occurs, for example, is because kids are ashamed. They're ashamed that they smell, they don't have a place to bathe, they're ashamed they don't have shoes, or they don't have up-to-date clothing, they don't have the, the in thing to wear, that there are many, many, many factors. And I think that as a community who really care about how do we address that, not only alleviating suffering, but breaking the cycle. And how do you get this next generation to begin to feel powerful and independent enough to break the cycle?
We're going to open up to the audience in a moment, but I have one last topic that I hope you can comment on from your long perspective of success in this arena of intervention and service, and that's liberation theology. Where did that come into your method, your faith, your power to be Glide?
Well, of course, in liberation theology, praxis is very important. Rather than talk it out, rather than speak always, rather than just put it before people and it becomes what one may easily call the concept of words. Liberation theology has as its core praxis, action. Do something. It's in the doing, we would say. It's in the doing. It's not in the saying. It's in the doing. Now, the doing can come later. The saying can come later on, but praxis is very important in my theology. I've got to do it. If I'm going to know it, I've got to do it. If I'm going to do it, I've got to do it. I can't just speak of it, because sometimes it just takes us adrift. And that may be what we're more commonly a part of, that of speaking about what's taking place rather than opening up, saying, I will take a risk to do this, and this is, I'm not sure how it's going to come out, and I don't have to have everything before me, but I have to have something that says, go and do it. Go and make it happen. Go and be caught up in it in a way that you will not have to just try to designate something that can go on the board, but not on the action. So the basis of that, of course, has to do with poverty, with the poor. It gives the people a sense of destiny, a sense of power, a sense of saying, no matter what, first and foremost, we are going to take this issue and put it before the people. It's where the people, where the poor, have an opportunity to really become who they are. At Glide, we do what we call speak out. Years ago, we did an action that said, tell your story. Tell your story is critical with us. Speak out is very important to us. But what we do in telling our stories and speaking out is you gather the poor together, and in bringing them together, it provides them a way of gathering their problems, their issues, but more than anything else, their action. They get to move. They get to take on some responsibility. They become then, in a real sense, an action-directed or a committed direction in their own plight. And basically what they are concerned about is those who have the power. Those who have the power, we would say, you've forgotten that you've got other folks that really need to be where you are, need to be climbing Jacob's ladder, we would say in an old song, or a spiritual song, climbing Jacob's ladder. We feel very strongly that there's no doubt about it. If you can't be first in poverty, if you can't have folks that are poor say by the way they live, we are here, and you're going to look, you're going to acknowledge us. You're going to have to work with us. You're going to have to come to grips with us. And what we want to do is finally we want to make sure that we have the strength and the opportunity to even reach a point where we find our ways of getting together. And when you get together, this has worked with us very much so. This book is about all kinds of groups that we have been with and a part of. And we're saying, look, we've got a way that we do it here. We want you to also find a way that you can do it. Here are some possibilities that we throw to you, that we come to relate to you. But you've got to understand that this is a power play. So poverty is a power play when you take on, especially the structures of society. It means that the power is shifting. The power is moving in a direction that brings us all together in a new way. So you become something. You become important. You become powerful. You become those who are able to say, I am not going to give up. I'm taking you on because your power diminishes me. And so for me, liberation means to be liberated fully. To be liberated fully and to be whole, to emerge, to have your strength, to have your story, to have your life, to become fully, here it is, fully human. Liberation means I become fully human.
One of the first acts that Cecil did when he was appointed minister of the church is he took down the cross from the wall. And it was a very, very huge cross. And I would say that for me, that was a very liberating act. I thought maybe at first we would get struck by lightning because I had enough religious teaching.
I did get struck by lightning.
To have enough programming about guilt and sin. And I think that the cross, which represented to me in traditional religion sin and guilt and punishment and sacrifice. I mean that God sent His Son to be sacrificed for our sins, and therefore we must feel guilty. And that, and that issue of guilt and judgment and sin were very imprisoning to me. I mean, it gave me a sense that only God had the power to act in the world, and I think that is a purposeful kind of dependency that religion perpetuates. Excuse me for that, but that is my personal view. So that taking down the cross was saying that really it was a reinterpretation of God's liberating love, of God's unconditional love of people, and that the suffering really is among the people, and we have the power. We as a people have the power to change that suffering, to address that suffering, to respond to that suffering of other people, and to also to have the freedom of ourselves, to free ourselves from that shame, from that guilt, from that punishment, from that mentality that says we have to be dependent upon a higher power, that we do have indeed free will. And I mean, I have this whole thing about Eve, which I think, when she ate from the tree of knowledge, that was a choice, and that she exercised choice to be knowledgeable. And that was the first act which allowed for diversity. And we can talk more about that later.
I think you can see from the way our guests are speaking about their lived experiences and their beliefs that it's not just words. It's coming from a deeply lived belief and practice of care for the human community. So I'd like to invite people from the audience, from AERA, staff. There's a microphone here. You can come up and comment or ask a question, and let's have some dialogue, if anyone would like.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have the privilege of being both a member of the GLIDE community and the education community. And one of the things I'm wondering is how do we, if we have an opportunity to educate leaders for social justice, what would you want that to look like, or what would you want that to include? And I'm talking about elected officials, policy and advocacy people, teachers that have had maybe the Teach for America training, and others that have had a longer, more in-depth training. If there was some kind of education that we could provide for the people in the education sector, what would you want that to look like?
I would want it to look like a dialogue. I would want it, rather than being a emphasis on the teacher-student engagement, I would want it to be a dialogue of people respecting each other, conferring with each other, educating each other, interacting with each other, finding ways to bring the issues before us, and fully participation of all folks who are part of that. You know, maybe little groups, maybe smaller educational forums, but whatever the case may be, I would certainly want it to be a dialogue. It must have some mutual. Jen and I have talked about this in the book, about being mutual with each other. I would want it to be a mutual kind of. It's awful to be mutual. It really is, because you really have to work so hard at it all the time.
Especially when you have an ego.
Yeah, especially when you got an ego, Jan says. So it's difficult. Yeah, it was difficult for me.
We all have egos, but some are more are better developed.
That's what I would want. Exactly, a kind of dialogue of groups of people, and finding ways to be with each other, fully participating with each other, and again, not just depositing. Just we got it all imprint, so just learn it, just memorize it. Memorization goes away, as far as I'm concerned.
I think we should stop talking so much, and I think we should experience more. So I really believe that mutual engagement should include experience of each other. And, Alejandro Mejia, who is the current poet laureate of San Francisco, who I've worked with for almost 40 years in a third world coalition of artists, said something that, Che Guevara says that you can call me ridiculous, but I think that the revolutions are based on feelings of great love. And I believe that revolutions are based on feelings of great love. And Alejandro has suggested that all the politicians write a poem a day, because in order to write poetry, you have to go to your heart. And in order to write poetry, you really have to be honest. If you're really engaged in the act of poetry. And I think that is, it may sound ridiculous to some, but I really feel like, if we could go to our hearts, and if we could really speak the truth of ourselves to one another and experience that truth honestly, shedding all of the preconceptions and shedding all of the privilege and supremacy and superiority that we hold, if we could do that is truly a way in which to engage in meaningful dialogue.
I just wanted to comment on the legacy that I always tell the story that I went to GLIDE and saw Angela Davis. So it's not just the GLBT, but it also, so I just wanted to thank you for that from my childhood. But I'd also like to, just as you were saying, stripping away the ego and everything else just a moment ago, is there any one or two ways that doing that has changed your lives?
Well, I had to get an ego. if you know what I mean. I mean, if I always call Cecil and myself a living contradiction because I've always been very much more comfortable in the shadow. Not any longer. Now I resent it when people do marginalize me. But I always, you know, I think the reason why we were able to work together is because he did have the ego and the confidence to be able to say, you know, and to believe in what he said to people about being empowered and us being able to really do this. It sounds ridiculous, but we can do it. And he had the confidence to do that. And I was kind of the one who said, well, in order to do that, we've got to lay down some rocks, we have to pour some concrete, we have to have a little bit of structure, we have to have some girders, you know, to hold up the bridge. And because a lot, you know, maybe he thinks he can fly, but a lot of other people need a little traction. So that has been our history, is that he's been kind of the one who saw the vision and you know, did leap over the river. And I said, okay, in order for this to really work, we have to build a bridge. So wouldn't you say, is that a fairly accurate, or do you, hello?
I'm here. No, go ahead.
But I mean, wouldn't you say that that's true, that I kind of helped with the infrastructure and you
Yeah.
kind of went out there? And also budget, you know. Kristen, you can relate to this, right? I mean, we had to have a budget that we had to adhere to. We had to raise money. We started all of our programs without any money. We started out with a budget of $35,000, which included both of our salaries. And our food program started out with feeding 50 people with just a group of volunteers and selfless volunteers whose selflessness and compassion, you know, I mean, I'm sure that they got great satisfaction from doing it, but it wasn't about ego. It was about really giving to people. And I think Cecil has the ability to combine that unconditional love with that vision and helped us to believe that we could really do it. So, you know, like my finding a voice and my finding a way in which to be present, I think really was trying to develop an ego that was healthy enough to still learn from others. And I think that that's where we mutually have had to co-create with each other.
And yet, the problem has to do still with how did the two of us make it work? Because in many ways, we make it work. In many ways, we don't make it work. But we have a way, and I don't know exactly sometimes what it is, but a way of making things work when it looks like they're not going to work.
We fight.
Yeah, well, we fight.
We disagree.
Yeah.
But I think what we do agree upon is the cause and the goal.
And it seems like unconditional love.
Yes.
And there's a heart at the top of that.
Yes. Yes,
Street.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
Yeah, I think it was a very good idea for us to be friends first before we got married.
Okay. Any other comments from the audience, questions?
Brother Williams, good day, and Ms. Mirikatani, thank you
Yeah.
very much.
Yes. Good.
That's my sister back there, and we came to find out about Glide from our father, who was a Methodist minister in the Northwest Nevada Church Conference, who was in rural areas and would come into town and come to Glide to be part of the celebration. And to watch him change was kind of remarkable because he was fairly rigid. He was a Marine Corps sergeant when I was born, Navy chaplain. But one of the differences that you made, and one of the most wonderful days I had, was when he did the commitment ceremony for my sister and her partner. So you reach out, not only to the people on the streets, but you also reach out so much to the pastors, the healers, and so many others within this area and around the country. And I just wanted to thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's
Thank
great.
you very
Thank
much.
you.
That's so good, so good. Thank you.
Well, it's great because we do enjoy an international congregation too. We're apparently in a lot of tour books throughout the world, so we do enjoy many, many, many people who bring their diversity to Glide, and it's great to hear that it's
Yes.
far-reaching.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Come on.
My name's Elaine. I'm from Washington State, so I really appreciate being able to hear you today. But my question is about, like, you've been talking about praxis, also in tension with being, and I love a conversation about that. But I'd love some advice from you about, I'm guessing most of us are educational researchers or educators in some way who have really kind of aligned ourselves with power. And some of us may have done what I did, where I sort of found myself in the Tenderloin without really knowing that it was there. And I wonder what your advice is for people in our roles who find themselves sort of in an environment that's pretty different than what we're used to and sort of where we've positioned ourselves. And then, so that's one part of my question is, like, on the street, what would you advise for us, for me? But the second part is then, back in our home, what would you advise also, you know, in a similar sort of vein, again, where we've sort of chosen power, but we might have, you know, obviously I think if we're here, we have a passion for the same things that you're passionate about. So what's your advice for us sort of back home where we're not part of Glide or a Glide community?
I'll say that, because I didn't get it fully.
I think the question was, and I'm not sure I quite understood it either, but what advice can we give you in regards to your being in your profession and expanding your presence? Is that correct? As well as following your passion?
Yeah, the two parts are, like, so what would you advise for people like us who are on the street? Like, we walk outside and we're interacting with people in poverty. What would you advise for that? And then the second part is, how would you advise people who don't have a Glide community that you know of in your hometown? How would you advise people to do praxis and be in those places as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I got it. If you had been, when we first arrived at this morning, you would have seen a practice that we do. And first and foremost, there were a lot of folks outside of Glide waiting in line to get their food. The first thing I do when I get out of that car is I start speaking to folks. I never miss the opportunity to speak to the poor. Always. No matter what happens. And they respond to me. But they told me I look good today. I like that very much, you know. For poor folks to say, you look good, you know. They may come, though they ask me my age. I said, I'm 83. They said, you don't look like it. I said, well, I'm 83. They said, do you need us? I said, no, not right now. All kinds of comments. So we dialogue as from the car to my office. And it's so important to speak to people, to let them know that you recognize them, that you and I see them, that we respect them. See, we don't respect poor folks. How are we going to win the battle when we don't respect folks? So we have to begin to respect people and to become somewhat energized by them and somewhat understanding with them. And the important thing is they know when you pass them by, they know you pass them by, that we pass them by. They know that we didn't respond when they said, you got any change? And of course there's that group that says, if you give them change, they're going to always be around. Well, I give them money because I want them around. You see, there's a difference there. I want them around because they are human, that I want to treat them as I treat myself and as I treat my brothers and sisters, because they are my brothers and sisters. That's what I do. They know. They know.
I think most poor people feel invisible. And I know what it feels like to be invisible or to feel invisible. So, and I also know when you are seeing me or not seeing me as visible. I mean, women particularly should know this when they're marginalized. You know that saying that when a man enters the room, he is seen, and when a woman enters the room, she is looked at. But my feeling is that if you just acknowledge their presence and with a smile, or just a hi or a good morning, that is really sometimes, I mean, I say sometimes it saves a life. And I'm not sure what the second part of your question was, but
Back home when they don't have a glide to go to.
well, I mean, I think that somebody asked me that. They said, "Oh, I come from Dublin or a community that doesn't have a visibly homeless population. What can we do to be in community with poor people, and or what can we do to be of service?" And I said, well, I'll betcha that there are a lot of people who are on the verge of losing their homes, and I'll betcha that there are a lot of people in your community who can't afford to buy groceries and to pay the mortgage at the same time. And I'll betcha if you started a grocery bag campaign during the holidays or something and invited everybody to come without judgment and really did it in the spirit without judgment, because again, shame is what separates us. There are going to be people who will need your service. So I mean, you start where I think you think your community is in need, but it's not going to always be apparent. But I think poor people are everywhere. They're everywhere.
And here, if you look at the conference program, there are sessions that address economic poverty, moral poverty, intellectual poverty, the lack of respect for others. So sometimes it's also how we're looking.
Yeah,
In terms of what we can actually see.
that's right.
Any other comments or people want to share?
I also think that fear keeps us from seeing each other, that we're afraid ourselves of being rejected. And I think we need to look at that, and that's something that you can do. Because I have to deal with that all the time, is how do I deal with my own fear?